Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C., as always here. Got a great show for you today on a very trending topic. Unfortunately, it's something that's continuing to go on with the Israeli-Hamas war. Seems like there's something new every day. We've got some new things to discuss today. But joining us today, actually, we have Max Blumenthal, who is the editor-in-chief of the grayzone.com magazine, I guess, if you call it that. I'm not sure what the right term is. Max is also an award-winning author of several books, most recently Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party. Welcome to the show, Max.
Good to be here, and that was my least recent book, but oldie but goodie.
I'm sorry, got that wrong, but it's one of the most interesting, I guess. What is that? What was the gist of that? The no kidding, the bottom line of what did the Republicans do to themselves?
That book was a book I wrote in 2009, and I'd probably have to write Democratic Gomorrah now about what the Democrats are doing to themselves. But that book really encapsulated the collapse of the George W. Bush wing of the Republican Party. And you can see through the exploits of Nikki Haley and Mike Pence and everyone who tries to get on stage to challenge Donald Trump and really embraces the old school politics that fused the Christian right and the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party. It's not really falling on fertile soil with the Republican base after the housing crisis and the various catastrophic wars in the Middle East. And so you've seen since then, in my last book, I kind of explained this in The Management of Savagery, how the neoconservative wing that animated Bush's foreign policy has transitioned into the Democratic Party, and how these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq actually brought Donald Trump to office. And Donald Trump was really the first candidate, period, to challenge the post 9/11 wars directly and speak to the moral injury that so many in the red states had experienced because they disproportionately fought these wars.
Right. Yeah. And you see with the latest Republican debate the other day, where especially Nikki Haley and some others are still trying to push that same line of you got to go and punch Iran. So, yeah, it's not really helpful.
Yeah, and Vivek Ramaswamy hammered Nikki Haley on her inability to even name the three regions.
Right.
I mean, he called them provinces where she wanted Americans to go fight and die in eastern Ukraine, and that really that's the essence of the kind of candidate that the neocons seek out. They always want someone who's a governor who has no foreign policy experience, and they become their rent-a-brain and tell them which countries to bomb. And Nikki Haley's the one.
And as someone with the at least the title of UN ambassador on her name, one would think that she would be a little bit more knowledgeable about that, but she seems much more fluent in the neocon let's go bomb somebody routine, unfortunately.
Definitely. Chris Christie's the same way. I remember actually running into John Bolton in Dulles Airport on one of those. No, sorry, he was in Atlanta on their endless monorail. And John Bolton was just sitting there. This is before he had his big Fox gig and was in the Trump administration. So he wasn't really that popular of a figure or well known. And I said, "Who do you want for president?" This was 2008. He said, "I want a governor. I think we need a governor. And, Chris Christie is going to be my guy." And he was basically saying Chris Christie is the least fluent on foreign policy, and I'll just be able to get him to bomb Iran. And that's precisely what he said to me.
Wow, and he certainly tried to do that with Trump on Iran. It just fortunately Trump didn't bite.
Yeah, he just
Uh,
sabotaged everything else, though.
True, and he definitely did. We can talk a lot about that. We talked about some of the North Korea stuff that Bolton screwed up that Trump could have done some good. But
Definitely.
I digress. We're here to talk about the Israel Hamas situation here, and you've done a lot of good work here lately, and I want to dig into some of that here. But for our audience here to sort of set the stage for what's going to follow, I want to show you some of the recent developments and things that some of our leaders have been saying, and some of the real problems this is starting, or not just starting to, but it's illuminating some real problems that are coming. First of all, yesterday on ABC News, Anthony Blinken went on to talk about some of the issues that's going on with the Hamas war, and specifically in our relations with Israel.
If you're continuing to send these weapons without any accounting for how they are used except talking to the Israelis, what other leverage can you use to make sure they take greater care in this campaign?
There's a gap between the intent and the results, and that's the gap that we're trying to make sure is closed. Look, Israel has to take steps not only to defend itself against the ongoing attacks from Hamas, but against Hamas's stated intent to repeat October 7th again and again.
Now, that the administration and really everybody who's blanket pro-Israel loves to repeat that, which, of course, the leader of Hamas was a golden opportunity for Israel by saying that out loud, and it's been used as a repeating. But that's starting to fall on deaf ears. And even in the region among our Arab allies, things are not going very well.
Are you worried that the Israeli Defense Forces are waging their campaign in a way that the region could be engulfed with a kind of extremism that would prevent your vision of the future to be prevented from actually being achieved?
This is absolutely a critical concern that we have. These images of dead babies in Gaza, of collapsed buildings, just like the images of October 7th have been shocking to the Israeli public. The images since are shocking and infuriating, not just to Arabs, not just to people in our part of the world, but all over the world.
Now, you're also starting to see, now that was PBS, and this, I'm going to go back to ABC News again here. You're starting to see more mainline American media outlets being willing to call things out for what they are. Here's what Blinken was again asked about the U.S. UN vote.
When it comes to the U.S. being the only country to vote against a UN ceasefire resolution on Friday.
We have been a strong proponent of humanitarian pauses with the stated intent of repeating October 7th again and again and again. That would simply perpetuate the problem.
So he gave a non-answer there about why we were the only ones in the Security Council that did not call for an immediate ceasefire for the purpose of saving the Palestinian people from additional slaughter. But now we're seeing that not only some of our Arab allies, but also some of our NATO and European allies were not happy about it.
Unfortunately, once again, this council has failed with a lack of unity. And by refusing to commit to negotiations, the crisis in Gaza is getting worse, and the council is not completing its mandate under the charter.
Now, Biden also has some potential motivation to try and do the right thing, and I wish it was just because it was the right thing, but he also has some political cost it's starting to mount.
Tens of thousands of people in the U.S. have held countless pro-Palestinian marches demanding he do more and pledging they will never vote for Biden again.
It's going to be a hard no for me. It's going to be a hard no. Yeah. Okay. Not to say I'll vote for the other party either, but I'm going to have to see if there's an independent candidate that I can get behind.
And it's showing up in the polls, as the American media keeps pointing out.
He is 50 points underwater with the youngest group of voters.
Now, back into the Israel where the war is going on, hopefully Israel may be having some motivation to do the right thing as well, because their war is not going as good as it's talking about. And Max, I know that you've been reporting on this about the IDF casualties, and we're going to get right to that in just a second. But here's it's at least publicly being reported.
Israeli soldiers are finding themselves in situations where they are coming under attacks from tunnel shafts. Remember also the unexpected weapon that Hamas is using in this war are anti-tank missiles and RPGs, many more of them in the hands of Hamas than Israel had anticipated. And that has also really shot up the fatality numbers on the Israeli side.
You know, it's kind of interesting the way they put that there, that, you know, it took Israel by surprise, which seems to be a theme all the way back prior to October 7th, that the Israeli intelligence doesn't seem to be laying the groundwork very effectively for their own side even. But ultimately, Max, and this is one of the things that's really been driving us here at the Deep Dive, and I know some of the things you've been reporting both on your Twitter feed as well as at the Gray Zone, is the cost to the Palestinian civilians. As bad as it was what the Hamas terrorists did to Israeli citizens and civilians on the 7th of October, it pales into insignificance as to what's continuing to happen to the Palestinian civilians.
There is no Iron Dome in Gaza, where more than 18,000 people have now been killed, according to Hamas. Khan Yunis, where thousands had sought refuge, now a battleground. ABC producer Sami Ziara is there.
As you hear in the background, the exchanging of fire, the ground vision continue for the 5 days.
Sami has been forced to move his family 17 times since the war began. He's desperate to keep them alive.
My concern only how to protect my family from the war. My kids, they consider me that I'm a shelter for them, and I'm not.
Nearly 85% of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, according to the United Nations, who say there's no safe place to flee.
Max, the stated objective of this war for Israel is to destroy Hamas so that Israel can live in peace. Is that a realistic objective?
No, they don't actually have. Israel has no objective in this war. It's what you see there in the final clip is the objective of the war, and much of that objective is determined by the political psychology and emotional deformity of the Jewish Israeli public over decades and decades of sustained conflict and colonization. The Biden administration has no strategy. The Israeli and U.S. regime, which is in many ways an amalgamation of elite forces, has no plan for the day after. They think this is Ukraine or something. And you look at what's happened there. And the Israeli military's battlefield tactics are not working. So Biden himself has fallen into a huge trap by going over and bear hugging Netanyahu and with Tony Blinken going to Israel and saying he comes there as a Jew. They've fallen into a giant trap that will destabilize the region. And it evinces a complete lack of understanding of Hamas itself, of the position of Palestinians, of why October 7th happened, and a hubris about their own ability to bring about some kind of peaceful resolution, which they don't have. And so we're seeing an acceleration of the decline of American leadership and an exposure of the complete lack of moral rectitude of the Western powers. And we can talk about any of these elements for the next hour. I think one thing that's significant, first of all, relating to the report you showed on the armed resistance of the Palestinian factions, which do not just include Hamas. Every faction of every political stripe is participating in the battle in Gaza. This was completely expected. I wrote a book called The 51-Day War about Israel's war in Gaza in 2014. And all of the tactics we're seeing on display by the Palestinian guerrilla factions were on display in 2014, and they were enormously effective during the brief period when Israel brought its infantry special forces into Gaza.
Well, and again, that just leads to the point where at that couple of clips past that I played, where Israel is surprised by this. And then, she was specifically saying some of the tactics that Hamas is using, but I'm sure that that's the same ones that you probably wrote about in 2014. And one wonders, how can they be surprised by this?
Yeah, it's arrogance, and October 7th triggered something in the Israeli public where, if you understand, I wrote my longest book about Israel Palestine called Goliath, which is really like a 300,000 word profile of the political psychology of the Jewish Israeli public. They're so immersed in a very warped history of the Holocaust, and they're constantly reliving it and then playing it out against the people that didn't participate in it. And they saw October 7th through the framework of the Holocaust. We heard this mantra also expressed on CNN by Jake Tapper, the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust. And so a lot of what they're doing in Gaza is irrational. It's just about killing and humiliating as a means of getting revenge, not just against the Palestinians for October 7th, but against the Nazis and against the Egyptians for Jewish bondage in Egypt. It's an absolute it's sort of an emotional catharsis of a public that is hyper indoctrinated and hyper militarized. And it's not leading to any clear result.
I mean, I can understand. I mean, some of those things, they happened. They truly did happen. So there's understandable that people will be concerned about that. But what I'm really puzzled by, and I wonder if you have any of your research has gone into this, as to why, especially the American public, can't say that two things can be true at the same time, that the Holocaust happened and it was terrible for the Jews, but that what we see on a daily basis in the Gaza Strip with like some of the scenes that we just showed a minute ago, where you had, these kids that are being killed and bodies, just on a daily basis keep going up. Why do we not have the compassion for those innocent civilians instead of only the, whatever it was, 1,000 or several hundred Israeli civilians that were killed on the 7th of October?
Well, only 1.8% of Jewish Israeli citizens, according to a recent poll, believe that Israel has used too much firepower in the Gaza Strip.
Whoa. No, was that low?
Yeah. And over 50% believe Israel has not used enough. So that also speaks to the way that they've been propagandized about what actually happened on October 7th. The American public is different. Obviously, Joe Biden's base feels differently. They want a ceasefire. A majority of Americans would support a ceasefire, but a majority of Americans aren't even making decisions in our own country. What we see happening on college campuses, where college campus presidents are being fired, they're being fired because of the wishes of the billionaire class that dictates what happens on campus, because they pay for the buildings, they pay for the classes and the endowment. So the Democratic Party itself is not democratic. Who's going to pay for Joe Biden's reelection run? It's not those people you saw protesting for Palestine. He's willing to lose Michigan even for that. But what we're also seeing is the collapse of institutions that were supposedly set up to prevent what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. Whether it's the UN, with one veto by the US, the entire institution collapses. You can see the aid that even the United States is sending through USAID is not going into Gaza. It's definitely not reaching northern Gaza. Over 50% of the population in Gaza is now starving, does not have enough water to get through the day. That's a deliberate decision by Israel, which controls all the aid that comes in through Egypt. And they're not allowing aid in, including they're going in, and I spoke to a very good source who's very close to what's taking place there. They're taking all the anesthetics out of the trucks so that doctors in these hospitals, which Israel has destroyed, like Shifa Hospital, Indonesian hospital, totally destroyed, whatever hospital infrastructure is left, they're not able to perform operations on children who are getting amputations with anesthetic. It's a
so what's the purpose
policy
of that?
of
I mean,
torture.
why would they withdraw that stuff? I mean, is the intent to literally destroy the people of
Yes.
Palestine, or is it to
Yes.
cause like Egypt and some of these others to take them out, or do they care one way or the other?
That's why I say Israel has no real military objective. It's not about Hamas, so it's not exactly a political objective. It's almost a historical objective, which is to end the Palestinian people as a people and force them to merge back into the Arab world. And so they've put forward a plan to manufacture a humanitarian catastrophe, push them into the Sinai desert, force Egypt to take them all, and gradually just thin out the population of Gaza, as Ron Dermer, a special advisor to Netanyahu, former ambassador to the US, has explicitly stated in Israeli media. And this all speaks to the wider doctrine of the Dahiyya doctrine put forward by former Israeli Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot during the Second Lebanon War in 2006, which is to attack towns and civilian infrastructure in which attacks originate. And he said, this isn't hypothetical. This is a strategic plan. So you can listen to the Israeli leadership right now and what they're saying. The Palestinians are Amalek. That was the word. Those were the words of Netanyahu. Right. The tribe that attacked the Hebrews as they fled Egypt and were completely eliminated by God in the book of Deuteronomy. There's supposedly an Amalek. Let me just make this point real quick. There's an Amalek. There is an Amalek. There's a panel in Israel that decides targets, and they supposedly have an Amalek doctrine where they can define any person as Amalek. And according to Richard Silverstein, who's a blogger who has very good security sources in Israel, my friend, Dr. Rifat Al-Arir, who is a Palestinian poet and author, who had tweeted some things that upset pro-Israel forces, was defined as Amalek. And he was assassinated this week, along with 6 members of his family, in a surgical strike on his apartment. So this is the doctrine they're putting out there for the American leadership. And then Blinken and Biden are saying, oh, well, we're just asking them to kill less. And we're not sure why this is happening.
Well, here's what Netanyahu said. I think it's just yesterday.
Dozens of Hamas terrorists have been surrendering to our forces. They are laying down their weapons and handing themselves over to our heroic fighters. It will take more time. The war is in full swing, but this is the beginning of the end of Hamas. I say to Hamas terrorists, it is over. Don't die for Sinwar. Surrender now.
Now, I think you have some things to say about that whole apparently staged operation anyway, but this really gets to the bigger issue that I want your view on even the feasibility of this. Let's just say for a moment that Israel actually can't force anybody to go. Let's say that Egypt and Jordan and some of these others stand firm and they say, no, we're not going to allow you to get rid of your problem by permanently getting rid of the Palestinians, so you're going to have to keep them. If that's the case, I don't think it's possible for Israel to literally kill all of these people or see them all die of starvation or disease and still maintain the support of the United States, because I think there is some limit there. So it seems to me then that the most likely outcome is that Israel is undermining their own future security, not bringing it more secure.
Well, yeah, I don't know where to start there. What Netanyahu is doing is lying to the American public and lying to the Israeli public, somewhat successfully. I mean, I think a lot of the Fox audience believes this, but they took all these men, hundreds of men out of UN schools where they were sheltering because everyone's home is destroyed in northern Gaza in the Jabalia refugee camp. And they stripped them naked, stood them on the street, and basically planted weapons on them and told them in various staged clips to hand over weapons. And then they said that they had that Hamas's entire Jabalia battalion had surrendered. Meanwhile, fighting continues to rage in Jabalia, and Israel is losing its men. So this is just a lie. I mean, Israeli media has even called this out as a giant lie, but it doesn't matter. They need to project some image of victory to the Israeli public and the Americans to maintain political space for this war. And that's what's happening. And it's not actually improving Israeli security.
Right.
Netanyahu's plan or his general modus operandi had been to quote unquote mowing the lawn. And what this means is every few years, you wage an operation for maybe a week or two in the Gaza Strip, kill some mid-level Hamas commander, scare everyone, kill some civilians, and then call it a day. And you move back to managing the occupation, giving a few thousand work permits here and there, letting Qatar send money in. And this model failed with October 7th because despite whatever aid was going into Gaza and the illusion of normalcy, people were still under siege. There were huge protests up and down the Gaza Strip this July, which should have been a harbinger of October 7th. People were getting desperate and the volcano was getting ready to explode.
Yeah.
But Netanyahu and his people ignored it because they think that, as with the West Bank, they can just manage the occupation. Now the volcano has erupted, and what I think they fail to understand is that any victory they achieve by planting flags in some square in Gaza City will be illusory, because Hamas made a decision on October 7th never to return to government, that they no longer wanted to govern this besieged entity, and that they will move into permanent resistance. Now imagine if the Palestinian Authority, which is already weak, corrupt, hated in the West Bank, if they made the same decision and said, hey, we're just giving up, you govern us. If Israel has to govern the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, that's when the U.S. leadership is going to start saying, no, you can't get away with this, because it's going to be so brutal and so disastrous, and the resistance will just continue indefinitely. The destabilization will spread throughout the region, and the U.S. will finally have to do something. It just shows a complete lack of vision and cowardice by the Biden administration that they're not putting their foot down now before this inevitability takes place.
Well, and Max, I mean, just from a practical level, if for the moment, just take the morality out of it, we'll put it back in there. But for the moment, just practically, I personally have observed, and the U.S. government has lots of bad experience seeing that when you try to kill your way out of a problem and kill all the bad guys, so called, is that all you do is you create more bad guys. The Taliban, when I was there in 2010, and we were having the big surge, was somewhere around 15, 20,000. It was 75,000 when they finally took power in August of 2021. Dramatically higher. No matter how many we killed, always more grew up. I can only imagine however many Hamas fighters there may have actually been, based on how every man has had in having his house and his family upset drowned like that, is only going to create, many more people who are antagonistic to Israel than ever existed prior to October 7th. So this seems to undermine any possibility of Israeli peace.
Well, I would say across the board in Palestinian society, they're not very favorable toward Israel, and the support for armed resistance is total. It's total. Why wouldn't they support it?
Right. Yeah. Why wouldn't they? Why would they just be passive?
Yeah. But that's not the issue. It's what is Hamas? Hamas is not a transnational terrorist organization. It's not ISIS. It had never had any desire to attack Jews abroad or kill Americans. I've interacted with them, interviewed them. They were running a quasi government in the Gaza Strip that was effective. The civilian infrastructure was effective. They had people out conducting traffic. They were schooling, doing, whatever they could. And obviously they're pretty militarily effective under siege. Whatever you think of Hamas, what they've pulled together under siege with mostly homemade weapons or smuggled weapons was just, from an objective standpoint, historically significant. So, and knowing Hamas and knowing people who've interacted with them on a more intimate level, they hate ISIS. Actually, they fear an ISIS-like entity seeping into Gaza. And they were noticing on social media that the desperation was breeding during the Arab Spring some quiet support among youth for the Islamic State. That's what you're going to get if you leave Gaza a pile of ashes with people there who have no hope, no government. You're going to get some kind of nihilistic entity coming in that I think, along with a massive refugee crisis, which will just destabilize the world and the region. And Israel simply doesn't care. The only thing Israel cares about is its own sense of being a villa in the jungle, as Ehud Barak put it. But, if Europe has to pay the price or the rest of Lebanon has to pay the price, Israel doesn't care. And that's something that, the US and EU leadership needs to recognize, is they're going to have to pay the price for what Israel's doing, which is, in my view, genocidal.
They may say they don't care, but they better care, because if they lose Western support and eventually possibly even American support, and they also gain more enemies in the region, they may care a great deal going down this path, because I just don't see how it can work. I don't see how you can say you don't care and then somehow have a protected villa, if that's the word you want to use. Yeah. I just don't think it'll work.
Israel's always buying time. It doesn't have, Saudi Arabia is putting together its Vision 2030. All these countries China's putting together the Belt and Road Initiative. Israel's thinking, 3 years down the line, 1 year down the line. They're just trying to get the next weapon shipment, because their strategy, to the extent they have one, is to constantly bomb themselves out of problems and then to bribe themselves out of political problems, as you see them doing with Congress in Washington, passing like 20 resolutions through the Israel lobby against speech that they don't like, and passing nothing to generate some kind of ceasefire. That's Israel's entire plan, and the U.S. is being dragged along. You see these headlines in the Washington Post. The Biden administration just doesn't have leverage. Who's the superpower?
Right. Yeah, they have leverage. Max, in the last few minutes that we have here on this episode, we could, like you said at the beginning, we could talk about this for an hour and probably still not exhaust what we need to talk about. But let's look at what the possible next, friction point that could come. And to what extent do you believe it's possible that a lot of Arab and Muslim pressure could come on Hezbollah to actually take action? We saw actually just a couple of days ago, both Netanyahu and his Minister of Defense given pretty open warnings that they may launch a preemptive attack into Hezbollah in the north. And if that happened, what extent do you think that could open up a northern front against Israel that maybe they couldn't handle?
Yeah, both Hezbollah and Israel are striking deeper into one another's territory. Israel reportedly used white phosphorus in southern Lebanon today, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, has told the Americans he plans to go in unless the U.S. does something, which means that the U.S. and Israel are not on the same page there. The Saudis have attempted to bribe Iran into pulling back its allies, including Hezbollah, but also Ansar Allah in Yemen, which is stopping all Israeli shipping and waging drone and ballistic missile attacks on southern Israel. And it's not working. Obviously, Iran is trying to stay out of this. So the next arena, if we're going to walk deeper into this abyss, is southern Lebanon. And that's a problem for Israel. That's a huge problem, obviously, because Hezbollah is not operating under siege. They have enormous domestic industrial weapons capacity, including anti-ship missiles, which they've showcased as a show of force against the U.S. naval convoy that's in the Mediterranean. And they have weapons that we don't even understand yet, that we don't even know about. They have pretty advanced drone technology. Israel gamed out several scenarios of a direct conflict with Hezbollah back in 2017, and they determined that they'd be able to take and hold several villages in northern Israel. So we just have to look at the situation now. Israel's south is uninhabitable. It's a closed military zone. Israel's north has been completely cleared out. All the Jewish Israeli communities close enough to Lebanon have left, and Israel sees that its borders have been shrunken by this conflict, and it will not be able to return its people to its borders that it established after 1967 unless it uses massive force. And so I think we're going to see the conflict expand, unfortunately.
That's what we've been trying to avoid, but I'm starting to see that it does have the feeling of inevitability. Well, Max, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. This is unfortunately kind of a dark subject here, but we're going to continue to press the stage everywhere we can to say, hey, if nothing else, let's get a ceasefire. Let's get some political momentum behind that to actually do the right thing, to have a chance to interrupt and interdict this inevitability, to protect and take care of the innocent Palestinian people who have just as much value as the innocent Israeli people who were killed. But we've got to use our leverage where we can to actually do the right thing for both the region and for our own purposes.
Definitely.
Well, thanks for coming on, and we'd definitely like to have you back, because this is going to continue on, and we're going to keep bringing people the unintimidated and uncompromised truth of this so that you can make sense of your world. We ask you to like and subscribe so you can keep on getting this good information, and join us actually at 3 p.m. today. We're going to have John Mearsheimer going to talk to us about what's going on in the other big war, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We will see you then, and thanks for coming to Daniel Davis Deep Dive.